Good afternoon, MAS Texas students and faculty, as well as our other guests. My name is Matthew Wieseltier, and I want to extend a very warm welcome to all of you on this very special occasion. First, I want to introduce Governor Olivia Fox of the Mid-Atlantic State. Olivia served as a New Jersey Region Chapter Internal Affairs Agent, New Jersey Region Chief of Staff, and Mid-Atlantic State Lieutenant Governor. It is largely thanks to her that we are here today. Ladies and gentlemen, Olivia Fox. I'm sure our next guest needs no introduction, but the least that any of us can do to thank her for her long and storied career in public service is to give her one. Ruth Bader Ginsburg was born in Brooklyn, New York. She attended Cornell University, where she graduated Phi Beta Kappa with a degree in government. She went on to attend Harvard Law School, graduating from Columbia Law School in 1959. Afterwards, she taught at Rutgers Law School for 9 years, going on to co-found the ACLU Women's Rights Project in 1972. In 1973, she became the general counsel of the Women's Rights Project at the ACLU, and in this position, she argued such notable cases in front of the Supreme Court as Frontiero v. Richardson and Ginsburg v. Weinfeld. In 1980, she was appointed as a judge on the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals, where she served until 1993, when she was appointed to the Supreme Court. Throughout her career, she has been recognized as a leader in the fight for equality, having revolutionized the legal status of women in our country. As an advocate and a judge, she has emerged as one of the preeminent legal and moral leaders of our time. I am also very honored and lucky to call her a personal family friend and mentor. Ladies and gentlemen, Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
Thank you for that warm welcome.
Welcome.
Good to be with you.
Same to you. So Matt and I have a few questions for you, and I guess I will begin. So in your experience, how would you say that the level of political activism amongst youth has changed, if it has at all, since you were a young woman?
Since the days of my youth, there were different periods. I grew up when World War II was raging. It was a war against odious racism. There was a notion that after the war, the nations might get together and we would have one world at peace. One popular cause for young people was the World Federalists. The idea was that we should be a nation among nations with the world at harmony. And sadly, that didn't last too long. And I think in United States history, we have seen these ups and downs. When I went to college in the early 1950s, there was a huge Red Scare in the country. Communism was the enemy. We had committees in Congress investigating people, many of them in the entertainment industry, and quizzing them about some group that they belonged to when they were young. In the height of the economic depression, some young people belonged to socialist groups, and they were questioned about that. So it wasn't a very happy time for our country, but it was what gave me the idea of becoming a lawyer, because it was called to my attention that lawyers were standing up for these people who were being questioned by congressional committees. And the lawyers were reminding our Congress that we have a First Amendment. It guarantees our right to think, to speak, and to write as we believe, and not as a big brother government tells us is the right way to think, speak, and write. So I had the idea from observing some of those hearings that being a lawyer was a pretty nifty thing to do, because I did not appreciate that at the time women were only 3% of the lawyers across the country, and most legal employers were resistant to lady lawyers. But then that was two contrasting periods. One, great hope for peace and harmony, and the other, the Red Scare.
So today and looking forward, I know a lot of us here are involved in politics and want to be involved in government as we kind of grow up, go to college, maybe become lawyers. What would you say is most important for today's youth to remember about their role in government?
Well, first, they should understand what our government is and how it operates. I'm told that surveys show that more people can name 3 of the 7 dwarfs than can name 3 members of the United States Supreme Court. So the first thing is to, before you can think about your role in government, is to understand our legal system. And our 3 branches of government, the system of checks and balances. And then I would say, whatever you care about, don't try to be a loner, because you're not going to accomplish much that way. But join together with other young people who are like-minded, and together you can make a difference. I mean, you can see some young people right now who have made a difference. One of them is Malala. Another is Greta Thunberg from Sweden. But they enlist other people in their cause, and together there is strength that would not exist if people simply tried to do their own thing without joining together with like-minded people.
So given that you have had a very long and full career, what would you say is the greatest or the biggest change that you have witnessed in the American political system throughout the course of your career?
Let's extend the question and make it not just my career, but I just happen to have my pocket constitution with me, and I do take this with me. The first words of our Constitution are, we the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union. Now think back to 1787, when the original Constitution, without the Bill of Rights, became our fundamental instrument of government. And so let me ask you a question. In 1787, who counted among we the people?
It was not all of America, I can tell you that.
Would I have counted? No, half the population didn't have the right to vote until 1920. Would people who were held in human bondage, 1787, slavery persisted in the United States? What about Native Americans, the people who were here first? The people who counted among we the people in those early days were white, they were male, and it was not every man, not every white man. You had to own property to qualify to be part of the political constituency. So what I see as the genius of this Constitution is that over the course of the centuries, it has been our fundamental instrument of government. We the people has grown to become ever more inclusive. So the people who were left out at the beginning, slavery was ended. It took a lot longer for Native Americans to be recognized as part of the political constituency, and it wasn't until 1920 that women gained the right to vote. And I think all of you know that we are now celebrating the centennial, the 100th anniversary of the passage of the 19th Amendment. And I'd like you to think about those brave women and men who were suffragists. They had to argue before all-male legislatures because the Congress that let out the 19th Amendment had no women, and the state legislatures that ratified the amendment had no women. They couldn't run for office. Well, that's what a lot of people thought, but I want to mention one woman who had a different idea. And her name was Belva Lockwood. If you haven't heard of her, you should. Belva Lockwood ran for President of the United States in 1884 and in 1888. She created a party, she called it the Equal Rights Party, and people were astonished. They said, how could you run for president? You can't even vote for yourself. And she said, well, I have my pocket constitution, I've looked at it, and it doesn't say anything about having to be male to run for president. So she ran twice. The cartoonists had a field day making jokes about her. And after 2 election cycles, she decided that she had made her point. So I celebrate this Constitution because it has become now ever more embracive, so that it genuinely includes all of the people who should compose we the people, all of the people who dwell in our land.
So could you tell us, I know you've worked a lot with that Constitution, could you tell us, like, throughout your career as a lawyer, as a judge, as a justice, what you are most proud of that you've done in working with that Constitution or otherwise?
I wouldn't express it as pride. I'd say what has been most exhilarating for me in my life is the tremendous luck I had. Because in the United States, in the 1970s, a big change occurred. And it didn't occur because of any court case or legislation. It came because the way people were living was different. For the first time, many families had 2 earners. A lot contributed to that. One was longevity. Most people nowadays are going to spend most of their years without child care responsibility. I am now a great-grandmother, so I have had, there have been many years since my children have grown to adulthood. So there was that. And then there was, inflation was a contributor. Because if you wanted to do well for your family, you needed 2 incomes. One would not do. So everything was working in favor of giving women chances that they didn't have before. And I think the courts were catching up to the changes in the way people were living their lives. I remember there was a recording by Marlo Thomas that she did for Ms. Magazine, And one of the songs was, "Free to be you and me." So it was all right for a woman, a girl, to dream to be an airline pilot. And it was all right for a boy to play with a doll. And that idea. So I was around in the 70s when the courts were catching up to this change in society. If I had tried to make those same arguments in the 40s or the 50s, even into the 60s, I would not have been successful. But in the decade of the 70s, the US Supreme Court, after holding the line and never disapproving any gender-based differential, suddenly moved in a new direction. Suddenly for the court, but not for the society that had already moved there. Just give you one example. Women were not called for jury duty in many states, including my home state of New York. And that was considered a great favor to the women. The men had to serve, but the women either were excluded or they were exempt for the asking. And that was rationalized as operating benignly in women's favor. Except when you stop to think about it, as a citizen, you have obligations as well as rights. And one obligation is to take part in the administration of justice. And when the laws tell you that men must fulfill that obligation, but women are expendable, we don't really need them, you are downgrading the woman's citizenship stature.
So we can all see how passionate you are about what you believe in. And with everything that goes on in the world today and all that you still have to do, what would you say is the one biggest issue facing us all currently?
Well, in our country, preserving the democracy that has developed in this country against assault, the health and welfare of our planet, those are huge challenges. I hope we will preserve our democracy, and I would put my money on the young people. I think there's a spirit alive among young people to want to make things better, to see what has gone wrong in this society, people's intolerance for views that are not their own. That's one concern about the internet. People used to talk to each other, but now there's a tendency to talk only to like-minded people, and you can tune out the voices that you don't want to hear.
So just as a last bit, could you talk a bit about maybe some of the best advice you've ever received, and then maybe give us some advice moving forward?
I'll tell you about two pieces of advice. One from my mother-in-law, and the other from one of my colleagues on the Court of Appeals. So my mother-in-law, on my wedding day, I was married in her home, took me aside and said, "I'd like to tell you the secret of a happy marriage." "I'd love to hear it. What is it?" "Every now and then, it helps to be a little deaf," which means if an unkind word is spoken, you don't hear it. That advice I have followed to this very day. And in all the workplaces I've been, even at the conference we had yesterday, and don't snap back in anger when you hear something you don't like. Second, when I became a judge in 1980, one of my senior colleagues wanted to tell me what he thought was important in being a judge. And I realized that when often student audiences will ask me, if there's any decision that you have written in the many years you've been a judge, which one would you change? Well, his advice was, you're going to work very hard on each case, but when it's over and done and the opinion is released, don't look back. Don't worry about things you can't change. Instead, look forward, go on to the next case, and give it your all. So I would recommend to all of you that sometimes it helps to be a little deaf. And also is don't waste your time worrying over what might have been and what should have been. Just concentrate on what's before you and do the very best you can with it.